So hello friends, welcome to this video. In this video we are going to talk about different ways we can implement functions, define functions and use functions in JavaScript. So first of all we are going to talk about simple functions. So in JavaScript we define functions using the function keyword and we can name our function anything we want. In this example I'm going to name my function add. Then functions has arguments. So in this function I'm going to name the arguments x and y, and as JavaScript is dynamically typed, so we don't have to define any data type in the argument. And then this function will perform addition and return the sum of both the numbers. So I'm going to return x plus y. So this is a way we can define functions in JavaScript. So let's understand how our function works. So first of all, our function takes some input. Then function performs some operations. Then after performing some operations, a function returns something. So this is a simple function, and to call a function is add, and then we pass on the arguments, for example 5 and 15. And as this function is returning something, I'm going to store this in an x variable and then print it. After running this code, I'm getting the output as 20. So this was all about simple functions. So now let's talk about different ways to define functions in Java. Let's talk about the normal way of defining. So it's using function keyword, the name of the function, then parameters, and then the operation which it performs and the value which it returns. To call this function, it's really easy like this. Now let's talk about another way of defining functions in JavaScript is using arrow function with body. So this type of function is something new. We define it something like this. We define a variable, then assign this variable to an arrow function, which looks something like this. This thing is new to some people, so you need to learn this, by heart this. This is a template. So this is how an arrow functions look like. It's similar to a normal function. The only difference we are doing here is using an arrow in between these brackets and then assigning this thing to a normal variable. And to call this function is the same thing. We do something like this. Now let's talk about another way of defining function in JavaScript, which is using arrow functions without the body. So to define it, we define a variable, then x comma y, then arrow and x plus y. The only difference in between these two functions are the use of brackets. So why we are not using brackets? So the speciality of arrow functions is it's simple function. It's used when we want to perform some simple operation. So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm adding x and y and I'm returning it. So as you can see here, I'm adding x and y and I'm returning it. So if we use arrow function properly, we don't have to use the return statement. So whatever the code is there here, it gets returned, whatever value is there. For example, if I did true and I call this function in a console log like this, and if I run this code, I'll get the output as true. So whatever is there after this arrow, for example my name, it will be returned from this function. This is the difference. And when to use this type of structure is when you want to perform some operations. For example, if x is greater than y, then do something. Else if y is equal to 0, do something. So when you want to perform such operations, you can use the brackets, and if you don't want to perform such operations, you can use a single line function like this, an arrow function without the body. So this was all about different ways to define functions in JavaScript. Let's move on to the next topic. So in this topic we are going to talk about assigning functions to variables. As it is possible in Python, it is possible in JavaScript also. What I'm talking about is if there exists a normal function with some arguments and then so this is a normal function. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it and pass Leo to it. If I run this code, I get this output. This is function and my name. So now assigning function to variables is possible in JavaScript. So how to do it? Let my var anything. This is a simple variable and I'm going to assign this function to this variable. And this is possible. It doesn't give me any error. If I run this code, nothing happens. Now how to call this function then? So we can do something like this and pass on this. And if I run this, I get the same output. So this is the way we can assign function to variables. Let's move on to the next topic. So now let's talk about the most important topic of this video, which is passing functions to another function. Which means if there exists a function, we can pass another function as an argument to that function. Let's just understand this by an example. For example, I have a function named add, which accepts two arguments x and y and returns the sum of both. Now if I have another function as sub with the same argument x and y, and I'm gonna return x minus y from this function. So these are two functions. Now the complex part of this code, which will be to have another function operation. Now the arguments of this function will be quite different. The first will be a function. You can name variables in JavaScript anything, okay? Only the thing is special characters should not lead any variable name. So the first argument for this function will be fun. You can name anything. Second argument will be x, and the another argument will be y. Now what's gonna happen in this function? This function is going to return. What we are gonna do in this return statement is call this function, the first argument like this. We are gonna call it, and we are gonna pass x and y to it. So we can do something like this in Java. We can pass a function to this function. Now how we are going to execute this act? So we are going to call this function operation, and we are going to pass any one of this function. For example, add or subtract. For example, I'm going to pass add, then 5 and 25, and run this. Boom, the code executes. As this function is calling this function inside of it and returning the output of this function. For this example, I'm calling this function operation, then I'm passing add in it. So I'm passing this function in it. So after passing this function, what is going to happen? So here on this line, this function will be called with this x and y, 5 and 25. Now to see the output, let's store the output from this operation function in a variable. Now log it and we'll get the output. So here is the output, 30. Similarly, what we can do, rather than passing add, we can pass sub in. So after subtraction, we get the output as minus 20. So with this example, I hope passing function to another function, the idea of passing function to another function will be clear to you. If you didn't get anything, you can just comment on this video and I'll definitely create a video, or else try to solve that doubt of yours in the comments. So now let's move on to the next topic. So now let's talk about function returning another function. So yes, this is also possible in JavaScript. For example, let's start with some simple function. There's a function named fun which returns 5. So if we call this function and store the output of this function into a variable and log it, we'll get x. Now if we run this, we get the output as 5. But what if this function returns another function? Something like function, something like this. What's gonna be the output? As you can see, function anonymous. So yes, returning functions from a function in JavaScript is possible. So for example, add some code into this function. So now what will be happening is this function fun is going to run. We are calling this function here. Then this function is going to return a function, and that function will be stored in this variable x. As we have seen earlier, that storing functions into variables is possible in JavaScript. We can call this function. As you can see the output. So for this example, I'm going to define a function opp. The parameter of this function will be op. Let's name this. We can name variables and function anything as per our choice. So what this function is going to do, it will first check what is the operation. If the operation is addition, we are going to perform something. If the operations is subtraction, we are going to do something. Or else we are going to log operation not available. So this is a simple function up till now. Now what is going to happen if the operation is addition? We are going to return a function. In JavaScript, functions with no name, which are defined something like this, are called anonymous functions. So don't get confused in future. So now this function has some arguments x and y, and this function is going to return x plus y. So I hope you are able to understand. It's very simple. I'm just checking if the operation value is equal to this addition sign. If it is so, I'm going to return a function which will have two arguments and it will return the sum of those two arguments. Else if the operation is, if the OP variable has a value of minus sign, then we are going to return a function, but here with the same arguments, but we are going to return subtraction of those two arguments. So I hope this example is clear to you. Now let's run this code. So what I'm going to do, let out1 is equal to, I'm going to call this function OPP. I'm going to pass an operation. Let's pass on multiplication and let's see what we get as an output. Get an output, operation not available. So now let's pass addition to this function. Let's see what we get as an output. We get nothing. Why? Because if the operation is this addition sign, we get a function in return. So now if we pass this sign, so now if we pass this value, this output 1 will be holding a function in it. Now let's call this function and pass on some values, for example 25 and 34. And after we call this function, we are going to get some output. So let's store that output into a variable, and after that let's log it. Once we run this code, we get the output as 59. So I hope you are able to understand what we are trying to do in this. What if I change the sign? Now what will happen? We are calling this function. We have a minus sign here as in value. It will be checking for this, then it will be checking for this, and it will be returning. As this condition has been satisfied, it will be returning a function with this arguments and a return type. So after we are calling this OPP function, we are getting a function back into this variable, and then we are calling the function which is stored in this variable and passing the arguments 25, 34, 25, 34. And as this function is returning x and y, we are getting x and y back into this variable out2, and after that we are logging. So by changing just this value, we are getting different outputs. So this is a good example of functions returning functions in JavaScript. Let's move on to the final topic which we have for this video, which is chaining functions. So now let's talk about chaining functions in JavaScript. There exists a function which is going to log fun. Then this function is going to return an anonymous function, and this function will be logging 2, and after logging this function is going to return another function, and this is going to return 3, and after logging 3, this function is going to return another function which is going to log final. So this looks like something very weird to you. Like if you belong to another programming language such as C, C++, or Java, or any other language which is statically typed, you're going to get confused for this. But it's very simple. What I'm going to talk about is a really simple thing. What you need to do, what we do normally, is call this function fun, and we'll get the output as fun. So this line got executed, and this function returned something, which is this function. So what we can do is store output into this variable and then call this function output. We get the output as 2. I hope you understood what I meant. We can also do something like this. Yeah, so this syntax is also available in JavaScript. I'm calling this function, it's getting executed and returning a function, and after this function returns something, I am directly calling that function. So yes, we can do something like this. So if I did this 4 times, I'll get this output. So I hope you understood this thing. It's not exactly chaining functions, but yeah, this happens in JavaScript. Also, if you do it once again, you're gonna get an error because it's not a function. So I hope you understood this thing. If you have any doubts, you can definitely comment. Also, if you like this video, you can subscribe and also press the bell icon. Also, comment on this video if you want any other tutorial. So thank you so much, friends, for watching this video. If you have any doubts related to any of the topic, you can definitely comment. And also if you have doubts regarding anything, web development, Python, some syntax, SQL, or any doubts you have, you can definitely comment in this video. And I'm gonna definitely create a video on that topic, explaining the topic to you all. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. And do like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Bye bye.